Number 1.
Rhonda already had business cards imprinted with canine specialties and her name, address and telephone number. She was to pick up invoices for the business in a day or two. And then, she was gone. Members of Rhonda Smith's family converged on Noonan a few days ago, seeking answers to what happened to the tall, independent young woman they loved. Despite years of police investigations and a flurry of searches, posted flyers and a $5,000 reward back in 1984, the family has no answers. "We don't want to take this to our graves," said her father, Jack Smith. Smith and his wife Susan came to Noonan along with Jack's former wife, Eileen Cornell, Rhonda's mother. Also with them were Jack's nephew, Gary Cunningham, and Gary's sister-in-law, Nancy Cunningham. Nancy's been in the family for about 3 years. While watching a true crime television program with her husband, Terry, he brought up the story of his cousin who had disappeared. Since then, Nancy's been collecting information on Rhonda and working to raise visibility on the now 35-year-old case. If Rhonda were alive, she would be 57 years old today. Her family, however, does not believe she is alive. Early on, some police suggested she had run away. I said, "You don't know my daughter. She lets me know what I can do in my house, so she's not afraid to tell me something," Eileen Cornell remembered. More recently, there have been suggestions that her job as a dancer at Tattletales, a men's club in Atlanta, might have put her in contact with an unsavory situation that landed her in the witness protection program. For her family, those theories are just distractions that delay answering the questions of what happened to her in February 1984, and at whose hand. Rhonda and her fiancé, Tom Shoemaker, were living at 7312 Spring Drive in 1984. She had not been feeling well for a couple of days, but decided to go into Atlanta to do some shopping on February 27th. Rhonda left home about 6:30 a.m., possibly stopping at a Noonan fitness center as she headed to Atlanta. It was a cool February day. It snowed that night, and she wore a camel-colored rabbit fur coat over her ensemble for the day, which included a silver blouse, earrings and a gold necklace. Around 7 p.m., Shoemaker called Eileen Cornell to see if she had heard from Rhonda. He was concerned because Rhonda was conscientious about letting him know if she were running late. When she had not gotten home later that evening, Shoemaker again called Cornell, certain that something was wrong. "I don't remember if we tried to call hospitals or the police stations first. And then we started calling the malls," Cornell said. She tried calling malls north of downtown, while Shoemaker called another set. Shoemaker called Cornell and told her security at Lenox Square Mall had located the truck Rhonda had been driving that day. Her car was in the shop, so she had borrowed a truck from a friend. The truck parked under the mall's east parking deck near Davison's was locked, and there was a wine glass and a beer can in the front seat. Weeks of efforts to find Rhonda or any evidence followed. There were searches in Coweta County and in Atlanta. Flyers were distributed at Lenox and at other Atlanta malls, in hopes someone would have seen her shopping. Neighbors were questioned, as were co-workers from Tattletales. Cornell thinks her daughter, who initially told her parents she was serving drinks at the club, was not scheduled to dance around the time she disappeared. "I was thinking she wasn't even working." According to some of the interviews with some of the girls, she hadn't been working. Cornell remembered. One said she was scheduled, and another said, no, she wasn't. Initially, Cornell and Shoemaker worked closely together on the effort to find Rhonda or any evidence of what happened to her. According to notes Cornell kept at the time, Shoemaker's father suggested he see a lawyer on February 29th. The attorney reportedly recommended he not talk with the press or pass out flyers. As time passed, the relationship between Rhonda's parents and Shoemaker, which had been warm, became strained. Shoemaker said last week that he would like to see the case solved. "What happened to me and my family, too," he said. Shoemaker, who still lives in Coweta County and has grown children, said he has consistently cooperated with law enforcement officers with regard to the case, including talking with Coweta and Atlanta officers within the last year. "I have cooperated with the police in everything they've asked me to do," he said. The flyers and searches produced no substantive clues about what happened to Rhonda Smith. R.W. Carnble III, who managed the Wicks and Stick store at Lenox, told Cornell that he had seen Rhonda sometime between 1 to 4 p.m. on the day she disappeared. He told Cornell that Rhonda was in such a good mood, she had made his day. In retrospect, family members wonder if Carnble saw Rhonda another day or simply encountered someone who resembled her. The family's efforts to find an answer to her 1984 disappearance in 2019 are rife with reminders of how the world has changed. Security cameras would probably confirm or disprove she was shopping at any major shopping venue today, And a cell phone would potentially offer a wealth of data about her movements after she left home. There was no DNA even back then, Cornell reflected. The case was complicated from the beginning because she was last definitively seen in Coweta County the morning of her disappearance, but the vehicle she was driving was located in Atlanta. Officers with the Coweta County Sheriff's Office and the Atlanta Police Department have followed leads and questioned people about the case over the years. Rhonda's family also believes her job at Tattletales moved her case off the priority list for law enforcement in 1984. I personally feel like that since Rhonda was a dancer, that she didn't count. That was really my initial feelings, Eileen Cornell said. Jack Smith said he felt the overall response was, oh, she was just a dancer in a nightclub. Let's go to another case. Shoemaker expressed frustration that Rhonda Smith's disappearance remains unsolved. At this point, nothing has really seemed to change anything, he said. Rhonda Smith had danced at Tattletales for only about 8 months, and she was preparing to walk away from that job. The house on 12 Springs was sort of round, Cornell said. They had added another room to the back of it. They were in the process of doing that. The plan was to use that space for canine specialties. Even if Rhonda did dance at an adult club, her parents said, their daughter still was a person, an only child, a daughter, someone who was close to her family and stayed in touch with her grandparents, someone who was loved. Growing up, Rhonda was a tomboy. She spent lots of time with her cousins Rory, Gary and Terry Cunningham. She was just like our sister, Gary said. She was just another guy running around with them, Eileen remembered. If they climbed a tree, she climbed a tree, too. Rhonda made lasting friendships, one of her friends describing Rhonda as a teacup of sunshine. Rhonda grew to a height of 6 feet, a dark-haired, olive-skinned, brown-eyed beauty as an adult. There were some awkward moments, however, on the road to the woman she became. Growing up, she hated her being so tall. She felt like she was lanky. I said, you just wait. A few more years, the guys are going to be there. And that's exactly what happened, Jack Smith said. She was our daughter, yes, but she was a beautiful girl. After a pause, his voice growing somber, he added, it might have been a curse in a way. As an adult, she was direct and honest with her family and resilient. She didn't let things drag her down, Eileen Cornell said. She just kept going. The people who loved Rhonda Smith have not given up hope that they will find out what happened to her. I would love nothing more than for me to have closure as well as Rhonda's family to have closure, Tom Shoemaker said. I think about it a lot. There are things that come up in my life that steer me back to that time. Rhonda's family encouraged anyone who knows anything to contact the Coweta County Sheriff's Office or the Atlanta Police Department. Eileen Cornell believes there may be someone who knew something at the time, but didn't want to get involved. Now, that person may have had children of their own and might feel differently. We're just hoping that somebody heard something, saw something, she said. No matter how small you think the tip might be, Cornell said, that memory might be the piece that unlocks a 35-year-old puzzle.
Number 2.
Stewart was last seen at approximately 7 p.m. on February 4, 2004, at his residence in the vicinity of the 4300 block of Old Smith Road in Gainesville, Georgia. He has never been heard from again. He left his dentures behind at his home. He lived alone at the time of his disappearance, and his phone had been cut off, so his family did not realize at first that he was missing. 5 months before his disappearance, Stewart began a relationship with an adult son whose existence he had been unaware of until then. He also sought treatment for his alcohol problem. However, on the day of his disappearance, his daughter visited him and stated he had been drinking again, and his home was a mess. Another relative went to his residence on February 6, 2 days later, and the home had been cleaned up. Stewart's clothes were packed in boxes outside the house, and his new television set, VCR, and a boat motor were missing. He was nowhere to be found. Stewart left behind his reading glasses, dentures, and all his clothing. His loved ones stated it is extremely uncharacteristic for him to leave home without his dentures and glasses. Stewart was awaiting a court appearance at the time he vanished. He was arrested on November 20, 2003 for battery. Between 1990 and 2002, he had 13 convictions for crimes such as public drunkenness, being a pedestrian under the influence, driving under the influence, and disorderly conduct, and he is not allowed to drive a car. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison in 1990 for violating motor vehicle laws, but served only 1 month. It is not known if Stewart's disappearance is related to the court case. His family stated they did not believe he would have willingly abandoned them. Stewart's case is unsolved.
Number 3.
Tavish was admitted as a patient in the Hughes Spaulding Pediatric Unit of Grady Memorial Hospital on Butler Street in Atlanta, Georgia on March 6, 1993. He was in the custody of the Department of Family and Children's Services (DCS) at the time. He underwent minor surgery over the weekend and was recuperating in a semi-private room in the ward during the early morning hours of March 9. His roommate was another infant, and that baby's mother and sister were spending the night in the room also. A nurse checked in on them at 6:45 a.m. At the time, Tavish's roommate's mother and sister were asleep on a couch in the room. When the nurse checked the room again 15 minutes later, Tavish was gone. Tavish's roommate's family was thoroughly investigated by police, their home was searched and all the family members were interviewed. They were eventually cleared as suspects in his case. Tavish's mother was being treated for schizophrenia in a mental institution at the time of his abduction. Neither she nor other relatives were considered suspects in his disappearance. In fact, no one in his birth family was ever even aware that Tavish was in the hospital at the time of his abduction. There were two persons of interest in Tavish's disappearance. One was an agitated man who tried to enter the hospital's pediatric wing after 8:30 p.m. the night before Tavish was last seen. Visitors to the children's wing after 8:30 p.m. are required to carry passes that identified them as authorized to be there. This man didn't have a pass and had no legitimate reason to be there. The man is described as tall and thin and was wearing a baseball cap. He disappeared before security could be called. The second person of interest was a woman aged about 25 years old, described as 5'5" and 160 pounds, with a medium brown complexion, strong cheekbones and almond-shaped eyes. She wore black pants, a long black coat and large earrings, and her hair was pulled back with a large bow. She was carrying an infant with curly hair. A man saw the woman just outside the hospital and noticed her because she was very attractive. Another witness saw the same woman inside the hospital. The DCS has terminated Tavish's mother's parental rights to his 3 siblings and was seeking to terminate her rights to Tavish as well when he disappeared. They had taken custody of the baby when he was a few weeks old and placed him with a foster family. His mother sued the hospital over her son's kidnapping in March 1995. The suit was settled out of court for $600,000. Authorities stated that a woman who was pretending to be pregnant may have abducted Tavish in an attempt to raise a child. They speculated she lived between 4 and 24 miles from the hospital. No evidence supporting any theory has been recovered, and Tavish's case remains unsolved.
Number 4.
In the summer of 1972, when Joan Sessions Tengelson was 39, her daughter Carlene disappeared from the Westgate Mall. Carlene was 16 and had just gotten her driver's license. She had dropped by the mall on her way to pick up her younger sister at a Mercer University day camp. But Carlene never arrived. Her car, the family's station wagon, turned up that night in the mall parking lot. Carlene never did. And never has. In the 44 years since, not so much as a trace of her has surfaced. There were no suspects, no clues. When I first heard about the case years later toward the end of the 1990s, I was surprised to find that at the time of Carlene's death there had been little news coverage of her vanishing. The Vietnam War was on. The 60s had just ended. The comings and goings of young people didn't always catch the attention it should have from the authorities. Even so, I was intrigued when a Bibb County Sheriff's investigator, Lieutenant Mike Smallwood, mentioned the case to me in passing in 1998. Smallwood said that his wife, when she was a child, had lived in the same West Macon neighborhood as the Tengelsons. They lived on the same street, Easy Street, just off Log Cabin Drive. What stood out to Smallwood was what the Tengelsons did when they moved away for a time and lived in other states. They left a telephone connected to their home number in a closet at the house where Smallwood's wife lived, just in case Carlene, or someone who knew where she was, happened to call. On occasion, the phone rang. Smallwood's wife's family dutifully answered. But it was always a wrong number. Carlene's disappearance was nearly 3 decades cold when I learned of it. Some of what intrigued me most about the case was how her mother and father, her family, had gone on living in her absence. So often we see the immediate shock, the pleas for information, when a person goes missing. Rarely do we read of the long-lived aftermath, the anguish and torment of not knowing what happened to the kin left behind. Now Carlene's mother will never know. At least not in this world. Joan Tengelson died in December, 4 days after Christmas. She was 83. Her husband, Carlene's dad, Arnold Ting Tengelson, who once sold suits at J.C. Penney, died in 2004. Joan was 39 the summer Carlene disappeared. At her funeral on January 2, a preacher spoke of Joan's lively spirit, How she loved watching the Atlanta Falcons, how she'd remind him on game days that her team was playing, and how she remained a dedicated follower of the University of Miami, her alma mater. She had, it seemed, even in the face of unthinkable loss, found things in life to look forward to. She was an avid reader. For years, she scanned the Telegraph obituaries and sent notes to mothers of the slain and the missing. Over the years, I wrote a handful of stories about Carlene's vanishing. Perhaps the most telling was a two-part piece called The Miracles of Loss. The reporting took hours of sitting and listening to the Tengelsons tell me about their lives. They shared the saddest parts that had consumed them and yet, somehow, had not. You often hear how mothers of the dead or lost are strong or rocks for their families. Joan was that for sure, but she also exuded a peace, a confidence, that still makes me wonder how. She told me how she had given her troubles to God, how she learned to live by a certain philosophy, one that is as heartbreaking as it is beautiful. You look at the beauty of a tree that's lost its leaves, she said. You look and see the shape of the tree. One day while reporting that first story, I was sitting on her sofa when she motioned to a Bible on her coffee table. She wanted me to open it. On one of the pages toward the back, Joan had written a note that she wanted read when she died. The note wasn't mentioned at her funeral, so I will share it here. June 21, 1972. My heart was so broken in two that I knew it would never mend again completely, till I held my Carlene in my arms. This is the day she disappeared. This is a day part of me died too. Joan is buried in Macon Memorial Park. The grave lies half a mile from Easy Street and the driveway that to this day bears the childhood handprint of her lost daughter.
Number 5.
Van Gelderen was last seen in Atlanta, Georgia on August 19, 2017. She was house-sitting for her parents at their home in the Druid Hills neighborhood at the time. Her parents were on a vacation in Canada. She texted a friend at 2 a.m. to say she was going to lie down. This is the last time she used her phone. She has never been heard from again. She left the lights and television on in her parents' house, their elderly cat unfed, and the doors locked. She also left her makeup, shoes and 2 phone chargers behind, but took her 2 cellular phones. Oddly, an Egyptian tapestry was discovered to be missing from the wall of the home. It was removed from the frame, and a corner of the glass was cut off and then replaced. The tapestry is described as hand-stitched and 5 feet by 2 feet in size. It was a family heirloom, part of a set of 3 complementary pieces purchased by Van Gelderen's grandfather in the 1940s, but it was of little monetary value. Van Gelderen's vehicle, a dark blue 2010 Mazda 6 with the Georgia license plate number PWH5902, disappeared with her, as did the suitcase she took with when she arrived to house sit. Her phone last pinged near Fairburn, Georgia at 7:45 a.m., but her car was sighted in the northwest Midtown area of Atlanta at the same time. The Mazda was found on September 5, 2 weeks after her disappearance, parked along Defour Place Northwest in northwest Atlanta, about 7 miles from parents' home. It was almost out of gas, and the driver's seat had been pushed back to accommodate a driver taller than Van Gelderen. Her missing suitcase was inside the car, as were her shoes, wallet, and glasses, and an unidentified person's shoes and phone charger. Both of her phones are still missing. One is a T-Mobile in her father's name, the other is an Android in her own name. Van Gelderen originally attended Georgia Gwinnett College, but dropped out after 3 years and transferred to Gwinnett Technical College, where she earned a certificate in office administration in 2016. Her parents described her as a very regimented person, and stated her disappearance is completely out of character for her. About 6 months prior to her disappearance, she lost the only full-time job she ever had, and was charged with misdemeanor theft after she stole $3,000 from the pet store where she worked. Her parents didn't approve of her friends, stating they took advantage of her and didn't have her best interest at heart. They think the money she stole was for her friends. Her father had accessed the records for her cellular phone because he was concerned about her relationships with friends, and he confronted her about her friendships. Van Gelderen was angry about this. She had moved out of her parents' home and refused to tell her parents where she was living. She also got a second cellular phone, one that wasn't on her parents' family plan, so she could talk to her friends without her parents knowing. Authorities learned Van Gelderen was living in a room she rented from a friend. Her roommate told police he planned to throw her belongings out in the street, as her rent wasn't paid for September 2017. He refused to let the police search the apartment, but he has not been named as a suspect in Van Gelderen's case. Van Gelderen's boyfriend told investigators she had stopped by his house on the evening of August 18, the day before her disappearance, and that he had broken up with her at this time. He also told them Van Gelderen was a prostitute and drug addict, something that hasn't been independently corroborated. Her only criminal record is the theft charge from her former place of employment. Although there's no hard evidence of foul play in her case, Van Gelderen's family fears she is being held against her will. Her case remains unsolved.
Number 6.
Waters was last seen in Lawrenceville, Georgia on January 4, 2015. He left his home with a friend, Jeffrey Emerson Mulder, to buy beer and never returned. Mulder later said he'd given Waters a ride, but near the Walmart on Hurricane Shoals Road, Waters suddenly asked him to stop the car and let him out. He has never been heard from again. Investigators believe Waters was murdered, and Mulder is the prime suspect in his case. The two men knew each other because they both fathered children by the same woman, and they had had arguments in the past. According to court documents, Mulder told his girlfriend he'd choked Waters and rendered him unconscious, then placed a plastic bag over his head and suffocated him. Investigators believe he burned Waters' body in a metal barrel at his family's property on Shadburn Ferry Road in Lake Lanier, Georgia, and then buried what was left in different places around Hull County, Georgia. A photo of Mulder is posted with this case summary. In January 2019, 4 years after Waters' disappearance, he was arrested and charged with 7 counts of making false statements to the police. He hasn't been charged in Waters' presumed murder, only for lying about the disappearance. He is awaiting trial. Waters left behind a pregnant fiancée. His family stated he was in love and was looking forward to the birth of his child. His case remains unsolved and foul play is suspected.